Let's get started. So the session today is Discover Trove, where we'll be exploring the Trove website. My name is Ruby and I'm part of the Reader Services team here at the National Library. So the plan for today is to start by providing you with a general overview of Trove, what it is and why it's useful. We'll have a quick tour of the main features of Trove, followed by a demonstration of basic searching and some more advanced search tips. At this point, I'll take a break and answer the questions in the Q&A that Judith has flagged for live answer. Then, in the second half of our session, we'll talk about registering and what you get with the Trove profile. We'll take a dedicated look at the newspaper zone, and then we'll wrap up with some more questions and answers. So let's get started. I'm going to now go to the Trove website, and hopefully that's now appearing on your screens now. All right. So what is Trove? A few of you are familiar with this, but for those who don't know, Trove is quite a number of things. Firstly, it's a collection of collections. It's a single point to access information on millions of items from collection institutes from around Australia, including libraries, museums, galleries, universities, government agencies, and much more. It's also a digital repository. So we have large collections of digitised newspapers and government gazettes. We have the National Library's digital collections available through Trove, including our archive website collections. We also have links to online digital collections from those institutions that I just mentioned. It's where Australian content can be found and often accessed online. Third and finally, it's also a community space where people can come and curate content, add value by correcting computer translated newspaper text, get tips on research or tag on comment on items they find. So let's have a look at the home page here. So this is where you can start your search, navigate to one of Trove's content zones, or check out the forum or news or other areas of Trove. So we've got our search bar here. So much like most search engines, this does a search of the whole of the Trove collection. But what I'm going to start with is talking through what we call these boxed areas, which are zones, so the different Trove zones. So to start with, we have our digitised newspaper zone. So quite a few of you are quite familiar with this, and that's not surprising because this is our most popular zone in Trove. This contains exclusively online digitised content and has a really large selection of newspapers, particularly for family history research. We have a fairly new zone, government gazettes, which is really similar to the digitised newspapers in terms of searching and accessing. And again, that contains fully digitised material, full text search index, and is also out of copyright, much like the newspaper zone. This is also worth noting for the family historians that there's quite useful material in this zone as well. So certificates of naturalisation, unclaimed letter notices, details of military service, and business tenders can be found in this zone. Journals, articles and datasets has a great mixture of content with a combination of some freely available digital material, some licensed material, and also information about physical material held by different Australian collections. It's worth noting that a lot of magazines and community newsletters are available in this zone. And also something recently that's been added to this zone is the Bulletin, the well-known Australian publication. As it's a magazine, it's housed in this zone as opposed to the newspaper zone. So if you're interested in that publication, you would head to the journal zone. Next, we have books. So books is an even more diverse zone. Like journals, it's a real mix of material. It also tends to be the default description for a number of items that are difficult to describe in other ways. So things like theses and artist files appear here. So it's worth knowing that there's a great diversity in book zones. Pictures, photos and objects. So again, so this contains a lot of obviously picture collections from Australian libraries, but it's also worth noting that this zone has an increasing amount of content from Australian art galleries and museum collections. So there's quite a lot of digitised artwork in here as well. Music, sound and video. Again, there is a lot of records in this zone, but there is also some digitised content. For example, all of the digitised oral history and folklore recordings from the National Library are in here. And there's also some material from ABC, including ABC Radio National interviews and podcasts that you can listen to online. There's also some digitised sheet music as well in this area. Next, we have our map zone, which is fairly straightforward. It includes digitised material, aerial maps, and parish maps for those family historians. Often people will see books in the map zone and get a bit confused, but the reason is that books that are described as having maps in them are included in this zone. Diaries, letters, and archives. So this relates to unique material, often described as manuscript material that's held at various institutions. Archive websites. So this is often an overlooked zone, but it has really fantastic resources within it. The Web Archive goes back as far as 1996, and it includes many websites that are no longer live. So if your research touches on things like old government reports or conference papers, or significant Australian events such as the Sydney Olympic Games, those websites can be found within here. People and organisations is an interesting zone that pulls together biographical information on individuals and organisations, as well as resources by them and about them from credible sources. So if you are looking for an introduction to a person or organisation and learning more about them, it's a useful and again often overlooked zone. And finally, we have lists. This is a unique zone as it's uniquely user-generated content. So this means that people who have registered have curated lists of content and have made them public. They might be creating a list for their students if they're a teacher or lecturer, or they might be collecting for a literature review or for a particular line of their family for their family history research. So when I'm on the home page, I can either click into one of these zones and I can search for material within that zone. But what I'm going to do now is I'm just going to do a simple keyword search so I can search the entirety of the Trove collection. So let's say today I want my research to be on John Clarke, the late satirist of Clark and Dawe fame. So typing his name into the search bar, I've clicked search and we're getting all the different results now for the zones. So for those who need a face to the name, this is the John Clarke that I'll be researching today. So we can see as we scroll down, we're getting a lot of relevant results to my research, but we're also getting a lot of other results as this is quite a broad search. So we can see we're getting some material that's relevant and that's possibly viewable online, but I'd say the John Clarke that I'm after didn't have £500 reward on him. This is the Radio National podcast that I mentioned that we could listen to online. And scrolling down, again, we have art files and websites as well. So it is really useful to often do this sort of first search of all the zones because you never know what different material might be across Trove. But let's scroll back up. So people can find, unsurprisingly, that this is a lot of information to come across straight away when you do a search in Trove. So there's two sort of quick tips I can tell you about to sort of declutter the view and sort of focus on what you want to focus on. So the first thing we can do is we can click up here into one of the zones. So if I click onto pictures, photos, objects, this now continues my search into this zone and we're just seeing those relevant results. We still can get side panels coming up. So again, if I wanted to declutter this even more, I can click on this arrow up in the corner here for maximize. And this way I'm just seeing the information that I want to see. So this is a good way of, if you find something you want to go into and sort of declutter your view, this is the way to go about it. So let's go back to sort of that broad search again. So as we can see, we're getting a lot of different material coming up and not all of it's relevant. So I'm now going to show you sort of how to do some sort of advanced searching to sort of narrow down the results. So there's two ways of sort of narrowing our results from this point. We can click into advanced search And so if you know a lot of information about the material you're after, particularly if it's a certain item, you can go through here. But I find the best way, whoops, that's just done cleared my search. Let me pop that back in. But I find the best way is to actually continue using this simple search bar to refine our results. So I'm sort of going to show you a few different tricks you can do called Boolean searching to sort of refine the results to get exactly what we want. So the first thing I will do is I'll put quotation marks around John Clark. And this way, previously our search was searching for any material that had the word John in it and the word Clark, however far apart they might be in that material. By putting these quotation marks around it, we're searching for this as a phrase. So if I do that search, we can see that brings our results down quite a lot. But those family historians and a few others familiar with Trove will know we're actually doing this search will still cut out potentially some material that's relevant to my research. So what we can do to sort of counteract that is do something, we sort of want to allow for a little bit of variation. So to do that, I'm going to use the character called a tilde. So the tilde is next to the 1 key on your keyboard. And what this does is it introduces some words of variation around it. So if I was to put a 1, that would allow for 1 word of variation. So this would mean we could find, say, if John Clark was written with his middle name, or if his name was written as Clark John, we would be able to find him with this method. So with this, I quite like using 2. So we sort of still searching for John Clark as a phrase, but we're allowing those middle names and things like that to come up. So doing this search, we can see we're getting a few more results now, and hopefully we're capturing sort of the extent of what's relevant for our research. So now we're still seeing results coming up that aren't the John Clark that we want. And a good way of narrowing it down next is sort of by doing date. So we can go down, we've got this refine results panel on the side here. And so each zone in Trove will have this, and we can sort of limit it if we know the fields. So we have the option of limiting to decade, which is really handy if you want to refine it to a 10-year period. But say I want to cover a shorter or a longer period of time than a decade, I can sort of refine again by date by entering it into the top here. So if I type in date, colon, square brackets, and then the date range that I want to be searching within. So let's say I want to search for him as an adult, the material he's worked on as an adult, I'll type in, let's say 1965, 2 in capital letters, and then say the present day and close square brackets. And so this way we can do a search and we're refining it to within that date range. So doing this search, we see that our picture zone in particular, we've eliminated a lot of those older photographs, which is great. But again, we're still getting sort of a mix of results. So one thing we can do, another step we can do is something I might not necessarily do for this search, but it can be useful if you're getting a lot of results. Say if there's another famous John Clark out there. So for instance, say this John Henrik Clark, if we were getting a lot of results for that, we can say we want to remove all those results from our search. So to do that, we want to get rid of the word Henrik in our results. So I can type in the minus or the dash and type in Henrik, and then doing that search will remove that from our results. So sometimes your searches might not need this, but if you are getting a lot of sort of, an incorrect sort of result coming up a bit too regularly, you can limit this. All right, so I might take this Henrik out just for now because it's not terribly relevant to refining my results. But what we can do is to sort of focus our research even more, we can sort of add some extra words that we know we want to sort of appear in our results. So for instance, John Clark, he's a comedian, he worked a lot in humour, so we can sort of add those words sort of in brackets. We can add them and sort of want them to appear. So if I might type we might want the word satire to appear, or we might want humour or comedy, let's say, and close those brackets. So this way we're sort of looking for any material that features one of these words in it. The good thing about Trove searching as well is there's a certain level of fuzziness. And so what that means is it will also include the root words of this in our search. So it will include comedian or satirist in our search. So let's do our search for this. And we've really restricted or refined our results here. So we can see we started, I think, with 38,000 results for John Clark, and we've now got 92. So this might be quite a small selection, but we know that all the material here is relevant to our research. I should also mention, if you want to remove any of that fuzziness in your searching, so let's say if we just removed all of this that we added, we can also do that with a 0. So if we want to look exclusively for, so maybe what might not be best for a person, but a particular phrase, we can put a 0 there and it will remove that natural sort of Trove fuzziness you can get from your search. So what I'll do now is I'll sort of talk through the different ways of sort of accessing material that you find in Trove. So let's click on this item. So this is one of the books. And so when we click into this, we can see a little bit of information up the top here. And if we wanted a bit more, we can click on view the summary of this work and it'll give us a little bit more information. But the three sort of buttons I sort of want to point out here is our view online, borrow and buy. So what we can do is, let's start with our view online. So if we click on this, we'll have different options coming up. So there'll be links to freely available here. So this way we can see that there's a preview available online at Google Books, and there's also an item available through Open Library. Sometimes on the side here, there'll be other online editions that are accessible, but they will be restricted to subscription. So you might see that there might be some public libraries that have ebooks available, but they might be only available to their users. But if you're a member of that library, you can access that ebook. But with this, we can see that we have a few public online versions we can view. All right, so going back. We now have the borrow option. So if you do find a book that you would like to sort of get the physical copy of, you can click on this borrow button here and see all the libraries in Australia that hold this item. So we can say, say if we're based in Queensland, we can limit it by state and see which of the libraries have that. So we can say, if we're in Brisbane, we can click on this link and it will take us to the Brisbane City Council catalogue, and we can see that item in that and then find out how to access it as well. And finally, we have our buy button. So what this does is this sort of searches all the bookshops that are connected with Trove and displays sort of those results. So the library gets no financial benefit from this, but it's a way of assisting you into terms of discovering a book if you wanted to add it to your own personal collection, as opposed to going into each of these bookshops separately. We also have on the side here other suppliers. So this is, we have our service here at the National Library called Copies Direct, and this is particularly useful if you're after a journal article or a chapter of a book. You can request that through Copies Direct for a fee and get that sent to you either by email or mail. So this is subject to Australian copyright, but can be useful for getting certain material. All right, so I should mention, with the searching we're doing up here and any of this other stuff I'm talking about, a lot of that can be found in our help zone. So especially that Boolean searching and sort of tips and tricks, a bit like what I've shown you today. There is a section in the help zone for that, so please go there if you have any sort of want any more information. So I'm going to pause here and turn over to Judith and just see if there's been any questions that have come in.
Hi Ruby, we have had a couple of questions come in. Tess did ask if the pictures that are available on Trove can be printed for own use or to make art to sell.
So that's sort of a two-part question. So you'll find that, say if I do go into the pictures and photographs zone, any digitized pictures will come up. Will have this thumbnail, so you can view them online and you can download them, which I'll show you a little bit later. So in that sense, these pictures that are digitized online, you can print them out and use them at home. However, if you want to make art to sell, some of these images will still be in copyright. If it's out of copyright, you can use it in your artwork. But if it's in copyright, you'll have to determine how much of this image you're going to use in your artwork and if it breaches copyright. So if you have any questions like that or a particular item you want to use, please use our Ask a Librarian service. We can clarify those copyright conditions.
We also had an anonymous question that said, do books with maps show in both books and map zones?
Yes, they do. So they'll appear in both zones.
And is there a comprehensive list of Boolean search commands available in Trove?
Yeah, so like I mentioned in the help zone, we do have a section for Boolean searching, and they do sort of list all the sort of search commands that you can use within that. So I won't click through it now, but please, I recommend you to click into that and find that page.
And the last one is just to clarify exactly what the tilde for two will do to your search.
Okay, so I'll go back and just remove this. So that tilde, what the tilde's doing is, so by putting John Clark in quotation marks, we're restricting our searching to a phrase. And so that means we're only going to generate results that have John Clark next to each other. However, often with names, they might be written, say his middle name's Morrison. If we have a John Morrison Clark, and that's someone you want to come across, by doing this phrase searching, we would eliminate that from our search results. So by adding tilde, it sort of allows for that two, so with the two, it's two words of variation around that. And so again, like I mentioned before, if his name's written as Clark, John, that will be picked up with the tilde. Otherwise, it wouldn't be if you just did the phrase searching.
And that covers the questions we've had so far.
Great, thank you, Judith. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to bring up another poll now and just see who has registered for Trove and if anyone here has a library card with the National Library. So I've just launched that polling now, so hopefully that box has popped up in front of you. And if you're just able to click on those responses for me. All right, great. The votes are coming in. Might just end the polling now because it looks like most of you have voted. And wonderfully, I can see that over half of you have already registered for Trove and over half of you have a library card from the National Library of Australia. So that's wonderful. Part of this is to sort of clarify Trove, registering for Trove and having a card from the National Library is two separate things. But everything that I've shown you so far in this searching, you don't need to be registered for Trove for. So all that sort of access you can do without registering. But if you do register, as I'm sure most of you know, you can unlock a lot more new features. So things like advanced text correction options, you can favourite and search your preferred libraries. You can create lists of useful items you've found and have them private or publicly viewable. You can organise content and you can have a profile page to keep track of all these activities. So I'll just demonstrate now sort of the different user activities that can be a part of a registration with Trove. So I might just go back to the book zone. And I'll just let's pick this one. No, I'm sorry, I'm moved around a little bit. Here we go. I'll choose this one, should have the options. Unfortunately not. What I want is something, here we go. I'll go back to this item again. So this is what I'm after. I'm after this user activity down the bottom. So what I've done is I've selected an item and I've scrolled down and we can see this user activity. So what we have is we've got tags, lists, comments, and reviews. So tags are keywords or labels that have been added by users. Tagging is a way of attaching words, codes, or phrases to items, such as articles, books, or pictures to help you and other users find them. So tags can help provide richer and more focused detail when searching in Trove. So a tag can be anything you want it to be. For example, it can describe a topic, a place, an event, a person, or your research progress. All content in Trove can be tagged. So anyone can add a tag, even if you don't have an account, but if you do have an account with Trove, you can keep track of your tags. So in this instance, someone's added a tag, Clark and Door. And so the reason behind this is we have up here, the item is by John Clark, but it also covers Clark and Door as they were the duo on the 7:30 report. So someone searching for Clark and Door without this tag on it might not come across this item. However, by adding this tag, it includes this item when someone searches for Clark and Door. So this is a really effective way of improving searching within Trove by connecting it. So like I've said, these tags are searchable and also appear in a tag cloud, which you can browse. So you can click on this tag. So if we click on this, we can see what other items have been tagged with this Clark and Door. And so in this instance, it's just 2, but potentially if I came across a tag that is similar to what I'm researching that's been created by someone else, I can see what other material they might have tagged and it might be relevant to my research. I'll just take that at full screen because I realise I can't go back, unfortunately, in this browser, but hopefully that's still quite viewable for you. The other thing I should point out with tags, if I scroll up here, we've also got this tags bar up here as well that you can go to and view all the different tags. So that's taking a little while to load, but this will list all the different tags that are being used, and sort of the size of the tags will indicate how often they've been used. So this is taking a little while to load. So we might, here we go. So you can see here, this is all the different tags that have been used. And so depending on the size, indicates how often. So if you see anything here that is of interest to your research, please click on it and see sort of what material has been classified with that tag. So scrolling back down, next we have lists. So lists enable you to gather together a group of items. So this you do need to be registered for Trove to create. So this way you can, anything you find on Trove or even anywhere on the web, you can add to a list in Trove. So you can add your own detailed description to each item on your list and decide the order the items should appear. So it can be, a list can be something like maybe, you know, things you might want to read, or it could be more complex like a teacher's resource kit. You can keep your list private so only you can see it, or you can make it public like these, well, I have done in this instance. And then if it's public, it becomes an item in its own right and others can tag, rate or comment on it. So let's see if I click on this list for John Clark. We can see this is how the list that's been created. So we've got 11 items on this list. We can see who the creator was as it's public. And we can also see the notes that have been added for it. So this is a really good way of keeping track of your research and sort of collating it on the different areas of your research as well. And it's a good way, if you add something, to add a note and you'll know why later, why it's added to your list. And finally, we have our comments and reviews. So comments are annotations added by users. So these can help you and other users find out more information about an item, such as the names of people in a photograph, or to provide a review of the item. So a comment can contain any information relevant to an item. and it can sort of provide extra information. So in this instance, we can see that someone's mentioned that the online edition of this book refers to an open library record. So that would be referring to this record up here. And so this means this DAISY file is what the online record is referring to. And by adding this comment, it clarifies that this edition isn't publicly accessible. It does have restrictions as it is a DAISY file. So you can sort of add that extra information in to clarify the material. So again, much like the other areas, comments can be public, so anyone can see it, or you can make it private, so only you can see it. And again, you'll need to be logged in with Trove and registered to have private comments. And so you'll see comments are most used in the digitised newspaper facet. So I'm going to go up here. And so for those who haven't registered with Trove, you can click on the sign up option on any page in Trove and quickly register. So all you need is a username, password and email address, and then you can get set up. It's worth mentioning that whatever username you choose, to think about it carefully as it will be publicly viewable. So there's a few tips there for that one. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to log in. It's remembered me, which is great. And then it's going to take me to my user profile. So I'll click on that. So this is sort of the profile page that you get when you've registered with Trove. You can change your email address at any time. But clicking through these tabs up here, we can go to our libraries. So if you're looking for a lot of books in particular, this is a really useful thing to set up. So in this instance, I've selected all the libraries around me in Canberra. So when I'm looking for material, it will indicate whether it is available in one of my libraries. If we wanted to add a new library, let's say I've moved to Brisbane, it can show me all the libraries in Brisbane that come up and say, if I'm based in Brisbane, I can select either the entire City Council library service or I can select a specific library within that. Next, we have our tags. So this is showing me now all the tags that I've used. So again, the size indicates how often I've used it. And this is a good way of keeping track of all the tags you've used. We've got our recent comments. I haven't unfortunately done any recent comments recently, but if I had, the last few months would appear there. If you do text corrections, so this is particularly in the newspapers and government gazette zone, you can keep track of how many text corrections you do. So I'm going to talk about text corrections in a little bit, but we can see here as well, I've done 41, which is not nearly as impressive as our top text corrector, who's almost up to 5 million, so very impressive. Recent merge or splits, if you find any material that you want to merge or split, that will appear under this tab. And again, we've got our lists. So as we saw before, these are all the lists I've created. So you can create multiple lists depending on different research paths. And they're all accessible under this tab. And for developers, if you want access for any of Trove's data, you can access that as well. So I won't talk about that in this session, but if you do have any questions, you can contact Trove. So now we're going to go back to our home page. I'm going to click this link up here. Wherever you go in the Trove website, you can click on this icon up here and it will take you to the home page. So let's go into the digitised newspapers zone now, and we're just going to focus the last section of this talk on digitised newspapers. So clicking on this zone, we get a unique newspaper interface. So we'll see the same interface in gazettes as well. So once you're familiar with the newspaper zone, you'll easily navigate through gazettes as well. If we had a particular article, newspaper article, or publications that we wanted to search for, we can really quickly do that by entering one of these browse options. So if we had a date or a place, we can search within that. But what I want to show you is I want to do this, which clicking on this button will view a list of all the different newspapers that are within Trove. So it takes a little while to load, But once it loads, it's a really effective way of seeing what newspapers are in Trove. So as you can see, we have a huge number of material, and we also can see in this graph the years that are covered in Trove. So some items might have a really, really short run, where others are quite a publication that's being ongoing. So again, we can scroll down. It's worth noting, as I'm sure those who are familiar with the newspaper zone have discovered, but most newspapers, digital newspapers in Trove, will cease at the end of 1955, as this is the copyright cutoff date. Unfortunately, this date's not going to be extended anytime soon, and there's only a few newspapers that we have past 1956 in Trove. So this is a really good place to look for material pre-1956, but post-1956, you'll have to sort of explore different options such as e-resources. The few exceptions, say for instance the Canberra Times, have been done so because we have copyright approval from those publishers. But if we want to look for a particular publication, we can narrow down by state, or we can also just do a search in that search box there. So say if I'm interested in the Bunyip publication, we can see it has a really good coverage. We can click on that, and again we can get a graph of that coverage. So if there's any gaps or anything, that will be apparent. And so once I've gotten to this point, I want to now search with, let's say I want to now search within the Bunyip paper. A really quick way of doing that is going up here and selecting this search limits button, and we can limit to issues of this title. So now if I was to enter my search terms in the digitised newspaper search box, it would search just this publication. And again, those search tips I showed you at the beginning, they are applicable to every part of Trove. So again, you can use the same searches that I was doing before in the newspaper zone as well. So I'm going to turn that off for now and just do a broad search for some newspaper articles. So now my research, let's say, is going to be on the 1967 referendum. So doing that search, and what's happened is it's popped up with an option of searching for the term referendum within the issue date for 1967. So you won't get this suggestion popping up in other zones. This is just within the newspaper and gazette zones, but I think that's quite relevant for today. So I'm going to click on that, and it's going to add that limit to my search. Again, we can see down the side here, we can refine our results. And again, there's different options than what we saw before. So we can limit by title or category or decade. I find for those family historians, limiting by family notices can be really useful if you're looking for people, as that will include weddings and events like that. But in this instance, because we're searching for an event, there's not many of those. So clicking on one of these, we're now taken to our Trove viewer. So a lot of digital material in Trove, this is how it will be viewed within the Trove viewer. And in the newspaper's case, what we have is we have the image on one side, and we have some text here. Up the top, we have the publication details, the year and the page, and the article name. So again, if we wanted to browse that, we can have that option of either changing from the date or the pages and browsing that way as well. Once I'm on this screen, I can increase, I can zoom in, or I can zoom out, and depending on the orientation, I can also rotate that view. So what we're seeing here is this is the copied digitized version of the newspaper, and on the side here is our full text. So this text on the side panel is created through our optical character recognition software, or OCR. So you don't need to remember that. But what this does is when we upload this image into Trove, that software scans the image and creates the text. And so it's quite accurate at about 80%, but depending on the quality of the image, it might get a few things wrong, and we get this text on the side that's not quite correct. So this is where text correction comes in. So we saw before in the user profile, there's a tally or a tracking of your text correction. And so what I say is, when we enter this, there might be mistakes that come up here. So looking across here, we can see that we have in this section, it says yote instead of vote. So a really simple mistake to be made. But what we want to do is we want to fix this to ensure that the searches can be done. So to do this, when I'm logged in, I can just click on this pencil, and then it allows me to straight away change that to vote, and then I can save and exit. You can do text correction if you're not logged in. You just need to sort of confirm that you're not a computer or a robot. But text correcting is really valuable because, like I said, this is generated and has 80% accuracy, but without the community coming along and correcting it, we wouldn't get sort of the richness of our search results. And it's particularly important for, say, people's names and things like that, which would be what people would be searching for. It's a really social activity in Trove with a really strong community behind it. So again, you can head to the forum and things like that in Trove to get involved in that community. I should note as well that corrections made to the text need to accurately reflect this image on the side here. And so even if there's a spelling mistake within this, we actually have to sort of keep that mistake in there because that is part of the original publication. And our guidelines and instructions can be found up here under why there are text errors. So I'm going to talk through this side panel here. And so, like I said, with a lot of digitized material in Trove, such as our photos and things like, and maps, this side panel will be available often in that instance as well. So we can click on our details, which is this I at the first one, and we can see different citation options as well as page identifiers if we wanted to share this article. So if you are using this for your research, we offer these various citations, and we can also download the citations if you're using one of these programs. We can click on that world symbol, and what we see now is our tags, lists and comments. So much like I showed you before, within this zone, people have added some tags and put it on a list, and as well as added a comment. So in this instance, this comment explains that this article is a letter to the editor, so it provides a little bit more context. It's also worth saying tags as well. A useful tag to add is, say, especially back in the day, women could be referred to by their husband's name. It's useful if you know, say, that female's maiden name, adding that in the tag so that they're discoverable through that other search as well. So we're all about sort of enriching the searching through the Trove community. So to click on, to go down this, we've got our tags, lists and comments. Scrolling down, we've got our download button here. So the download button is really, really great tool to use if you do sort of want to keep a collection of sort of offline material. So you can download the article in a few formats, and you can also download the page and issue, though it's worth noting the issue would obviously be quite a large document if you were to download that. So keep that in mind. Next, we have our buy option. So download, you can get fairly good resolution downloads, but if you want a higher resolution, you can go through our copies direct option to get a higher resolution copy of the material in question and get that either email or printed to you. We have our share option. So if you were wanting to share any information you found through your social media networks, you can do that. We also have our print option as well. So you can either print the image, so coming up in blue is that on the right, or you can print the text. So in this instance, it's a citation, but we can also make it the article text as well. And then we have our display settings. So depending on your preference, you can change things like you might want it dark on light or light on dark, depending on your preference. So that's the side panel layout on Trove. And And I'm just going to now pop back to the home page. So we've coming to the end of our presentation today. We have a few things I just want to point you with if you have any further questions. So up here, you can access this on any page in Trove, but we've got our site news, statistics, tags, help, forum, and contact us. If you have any Trove specific questions, we would recommend you go through the Trove Contact Us page, as that goes to the Trove team here at the National Library. But if you have any general research questions, that's when you can come through the National Library's Ask a Librarian service. And they also have things, useful things up here like a guide to Trove, how to correct newspaper text, as well as different news and blogs that they create, which can be really interesting to see any new additions to Trove. And then again, you can engage with Trove on Twitter and Facebook as well. All right, so I might just jump now back to the PowerPoint. And one thing I just wanted to highlight before finishing up today is we have a project here at Trove called 50 Objects. So this is particularly useful for those of you who have been using Trove a little bit. And if you've come across something unique object that might be interesting to you for a number of reasons, we'd really like to find out about that. So you can let us know at trove@nla.gov.au if you have any of these items, and they'll be featured as part of Trove's celebration of the 50th anniversary of the National Library building here in Canberra. So if you have any suggestions for that, please get in touch. But otherwise, thank you very much. And is there any questions?
We do actually have a few more, quite a few of them to do with newspapers.
Excellent. What I might do is I might turn on the video so you get to see our lovely faces again, and my reflective glasses, because I will be needing them for this section.
All right, I'll start with hopefully the one that has the simplest answer to it first. Are the newspapers available only Australian?
Yes, so at the moment Trove is focused on Australian content. To my knowledge, I might be wrong on this. I'm only have across certain Trove things, but yes, I believe, to my understanding, is mainly Australian newspapers.
Okay. And how often do we know? Are newspapers digitised? Is it an ongoing operation?
So it is. We are constantly adding to Trove. I can go back. One thing I meant to point out actually on the home page is this number up here. So this is the amount of material that's in Trove at the moment, and this number does grow. Maybe not every day, but at least every week. I've been keeping an eye on it, and it's growing considerably. So new material is constantly being added into Trove. So you might find that there's a newspaper that has some years available and that there's some years that might not be in Trove. And there's a good chance we're digitising that and adding that into Trove, as we want a really comprehensive collection to Trove. But it's worth keeping an eye on the news and the Trove social media, because they will let us know when there's new information coming into that. And I think as well, in the digitised newspapers, one thing I pointed out is we have these RSS feeds you can subscribe to if you use RSS, and that will update you. Well, they've disappeared, but they should be down the bottom here. If that, you'll get alerts as new items are added.
Can someone put in a request for a particular paper they'd like to see digitised?
You can. So we're often working with different institutions about that, but you can indicate your interest to the Trove team if there is material in Trove you'd like to see there, and then it will be hopefully only a matter of time until that item is added.
And that would just be through the feedback form, isn't it?
Yeah, feedback form, or the Trove contact us as well. You can just sort of add suggestions.
Fantastic. Now we've got a couple more. So does Trove include libraries from learning institutions?
Learning institutions, for instance, universities. It does include most universities and other libraries like that. So again, it doesn't have every library in Australia, but it does have most of them, and it would include certain learning institutions.
Okay. Fantastic. Then we had someone who was a little concerned with the text corrections.
Yes.
And should we worry, given that text corrections are available to anyone who logs in, that people could potentially go rogue and make purposeful mistakes?
Look, I really hope no one does go rogue. I think the beauty of the Trove community is those people who are active with text corrections understand the importance of correcting it accurately, as it will improve searching for all users. So there's always a chance that people will maybe, play up and do the wrong thing. But again, because of the community, there's a good chance that someone will come across that and correct it again. So by no means can that change be permanent.
And so it's perfectly fine for someone to go in and adjust any corrections.
Yes, so please, so some items, you can see often how many text corrections are. So someone might come in and correct, say, important things like just the names, and a lot of the body of the text might still have mistakes. So again, you can go in and correct that if you notice that. So multiple corrections can be made.
Okay, then in terms of tagged items, can you change your tagged items or rename a tag?
Yes, so you can remove tags and change tags, and you can also add multiple tags to one item. So if one item you want to have multiple tags on, you can add them as you want and remove them as well.
And if your list is public, can anyone add more content to it?
That's a good question. I don't believe anyone can add content to your list. Is you as a list creator, you've put together that list, and so people can view it and click through it and explore, but they won't be able to edit or affect your list. Only you can do that.
Okay, and we have one more question. If you know the name of the town, but you don't know the newspaper name, does Trove help look that up? Or
yes, so that's a good question. And so again, what we can do is, like I indicated up here, we do have some international newspapers, there you go, worth exploring that option. But you can limit it by state, so Queensland. And so this will give an alphabetic list of the papers available, but also going back to the browse, you can browse by place. And again, you can sort of limit, again, that alphabetical search is an option. So you can do that, and otherwise I'd recommend using our catalogue or Google to again explore what different publications might have been held, because again there might be one town that has multiple publications over the years in terms of names and how often they were published.
That is, I think, all we really have time for at the moment.
Yes, we've come right on 2 o'clock.
So unfortunately we do have to end the session now, but if you do have any more questions, and I think a few have already popped up on the Q&A there, please do bear in mind that you can use our Ask a Librarian service that's available through the National Library's website. We've got the link up on the screen there for you. More than happy to address any concerns, questions, queries that you have through that service. And before we go, we also do have a feedback survey that I will be posting in the chat, and we'll leave that up for a few minutes. If you could fill that in, that would be fantastic. But if you can't get to it today, that's not a problem. We will also be sending the link out in the email, thanking you again for your participation. That's due to go out tomorrow.
Yeah, correct. Yes.
But for now, thank you very much to everyone who could make it here with us today. We hope you've gotten something out of the session. And thank you to Ruby for the presentation.
Excellent. Thank you, everyone.